Have you ever wondered how pornography may be affecting your mental health, your sense of self worth, or even your relationships? We're going to talk in this episode about how pornography affects us as men, and then also what we can do about it if we have a desire to change some of our current habit patterns. I want to share a couple of statistics that I think are really powerful to help understand the grip that pornography has on our culture today. We're going to talk about why these statistics are so significant. So the first statistic is that 93% of boys have been exposed to porn by age 18, and the average first exposure was age 11. Now, I think that's extremely significant because the child's brain is developing at such an early stage, and when they have access to pornography that early on, the amount of dopamine that can create in terms of just the neural pathways of the brain and changing just the reward mechanisms when the brain is still at such a malleable place can really have a long-term effect on just the pleasure and pain circuitry inside of the brain. And so when the brain learns at a very, very early age that it can get this huge influx of dopamine just by watching pornography, then the brain is instantly brought into this loop at a very early age, with the understanding that it can achieve mass amounts of dopamine without needing to do a lot of work. And so as we understand why pornography is so dangerous, something very fundamental to understand is really just what dopamine is and how it works. And you may be familiar with what dopamine is, but basically dopamine is one of the chemicals inside of our brain that is created or that is involved in the reward seeking aspect. And so in ancient times, this would have made a lot of sense that our brain would get little hits of dopamine if we saw, berries or a source of food out in the wilderness, or if we're hunting an animal and we see a blood trail, then we get a little bit of dopamine to continue to following this. So dopamine really has a role to play within the motivation inside of the human body. And so what we've essentially done with pornography is that we have created a sense of dopamine release that is created without the need for any prior work to have been done beforehand. This is also true even just in the bounds of emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy, that, we no longer have to go through the awkwardness or the uncomfortability of interacting with somebody in a sexual way or having emotional intimacy with somebody, the risk of being exposed or the risk of being intimate with somebody and being rejected. All of that is part of the sexual experience in some way. It's actually going through that experience that we get the reward of feeling connected with somebody and feeling emotionally intimate with somebody. But when we just result to watching pornography, the way that we're defining pornography here is, just anything that involves nudity, whether it's just photos or images or even videos that are found online. And obviously today there's a lot what people can do with just headsets and AI that I think is going to be very alarming for our future generations and how they navigate pornography. I'm also going to share too my experience with pornography. I first got glimpses of pornography when I was in 7th grade, so about 12 or 13 years old myself, and just kind of started with like some softcore stuff, and over time it just got more and more intense as I kept craving more and more hits of dopamine. There were several times during my young adolescence, like I remember for my 16th birthday, I'd told myself that I was going to quit porn, and I made it like 5 days, and I didn't realize how much of a hold this addiction had on me in my life and how much it was affecting me as well. And essentially what I think that pornography has done to my brain from a very early point is that it has created a system of instantly objectifying other people. And I think that was there in the human condition beforehand, but I don't think to the same extent that my brain has been conditioned to instantly seek dopamine by sexualizing other people and viewing them as objects. I think that the pornography has conditioned my brain to seek that in other people, just seeking pleasure. And so I know for myself, it's been a process of unwinding with that. And I went from, age 16 to 18, I'd probably watch porn like twice a day, when I woke up in the morning and then before I went to bed. And so I was just programming my brain. Not only was I programming my brain to sexualize people, but I was also programming my brain to see sex in a different way. My first images of sex were two people deeply in love with each other, having an ecstatic romantic experience. My typical image of pornography that I was watching were two actors who had just met each other, probably using alcohol or drugs in order to go through with what they're about to do, smashing bodies together for 30 minutes, screaming towards each other, and then having some kind of explosive ending. Then that is sort of what I viewed as pornography. Pornography is conditioned me to view sex in that way, that's what sex was. And so I had a lot of my sexual education through pornography, because the school systems weren't really doing that, and there wasn't really anybody in my life who was giving me that either. It's a very taboo subject to talk about in puritanical culture. And so pornography really was my first form of education towards how to interact with, for me, it was women being, I'd identify as heterosexual. So it really taught me to, it taught me how to interact with women in a way that it isn't always healthy. I think it's just had huge impacts on my brain and the reward circuitry inside of me. And it was very difficult for me in high school and even into college, as I was still using pornography, to really connect with anybody emotionally. I really just I could connect sexually with people, but emotionally there was some difficulty there as well. And there was a lot of shame that was occurring in the pornography use. And something that's very dangerous about pornography use is that, just like we're talking about here with the reward mechanisms and the dopamine inside of the brain, that every time I watched porn, I would get that wave of dopamine, which is essentially a message to my body validating everything that we're doing, right? If one of the main objectives of the human body is to reproduce, and I'm artificially watching something and going through somewhat of a real experience that is tricking my brain into thinking that we're actually having sex, then even if my life is going to shambles around me, my brain is tricked into thinking that it's what's happening is okay. But I noticed as soon as I stopped watching pornography, then my brain started kicking into gear. It started saying, okay, we're not getting laid right now. Something must be up here. What's going on? And that's when I started exercising more and taking better care of myself and getting interested in finances and start working more towards a career path. I was deconditioning my brain to have these huge surges of dopamine, which is the same sort of process and addiction that comes with substance abuse as well. And at that time of my life, when I was heavily watching pornography, it was the case that I was smoking marijuana, I was in unhealthy relationships, I wasn't really following my purpose or passion, I wasn't really interested in money or finances, I was in a very depressed place, but because my brain was getting tricked into thinking that I was having sex, that my brain was under the imagination that things must be okay, even though there's all this bad stuff that's happening. As long as I'm reproducing, then why is there a need to change anything, right? And so that's one of the huge dangers that comes with pornography. And so just to continue my story a little bit, after the age of when I went to college and was still consistently watching pornography, and it wasn't until about age 21 that I really kind of started taking a look at what was going on. I tried to go a couple of weeks. I got involved in the NoFap community, which is just a community of people online that commit to no ejaculation at all. For me, that was extremely intense, of trying to go 1 to 2 weeks after going, almost 10 years of consistently watching pornography every single day. The first time I tried to do just like a streak of NoFap or not watching pornography, I went about 2 weeks. I think it was actually a week the first time, and then, ended up watching pornography and having a relapse. And then the second time, a couple of months later, I ended up going, trying to go for a month, and I ended up relapsing after about 2 weeks. And then third time I tried, it was for NoFap November, which is kind of just like this little online thing where you just try not to ejaculate for an entire month. And for me, that was a turning point. That was the first time in my life I was interested in stopping my marijuana use as well, but the pornography was one of the main things that I really wanted to kick. And for me, I ended up going that entire month, and then I relapsed after the entire month was over. But it was the first time that I was able to get just a little bit of self-control back into my life and not be at the complete whims of my nervous system. And as we talk about addiction here, it's important to understand that with addiction, it has nothing to do with willpower. You can have all the willpower in the world, but when addiction comes online, addiction comes in a way that seduces the willpower. It has nothing to do with willpower. What's essentially happening inside of the brain is that the brain has been conditioned to receive a certain amount of dopamine. And when the brain isn't receiving that certain amount of dopamine, then it, because of its previous conditioning, is at a lower state of dopamine, right? Because if we're getting consistently high waves of dopamine, it's going to decrease our natural dopamine because it knows that we're going to be getting those high waves, always seeking a state of homeostasis. And so when we don't get those high waves of dopamine, we're at that extremely low level of dopamine naturally. And then what ends up happening is, at a low level of dopamine, the brain actually goes into a panic mode. The brain will actually think that it's going to die, even though it won't, which is true with addictions, which is true with, pornography addiction, with gambling, workaholism, whatever it is, if the brain doesn't, achieve that certain level of dopamine that it's used to achieving, the brain does go into a panic mode. And that's where essentially that willpower is overridden. These animalistic urges come in to try and produce that same level of dopamine. It's a survival mechanism. It's the brain trying to keep the organism alive. And there's nothing wrong about that. It's actually, if you look at it from that perspective, you can find some understanding when it comes to addiction. In that way, is the brain is just trying to keep the organism alive, and there's almost a little bit of nobility in that. However, not to say that addiction doesn't cause immense amount of suffering inside of the human body as well as in relationships of those around him. So after that time that I went for NoFap for a whole month, that gave me a little bit of clarity to then know that I could at least give it a couple shots. So I went a couple more times the remaining years to go, like 2, maybe 3 months at a time, and then I would relapse and watch pornography, and there'd be so much shame that would come with that. I would spiral into a shame. I'd probably watch porn again for another week or 2 or even a month at a time. And then during COVID, it ramped up a little bit just because I was at home and there was just a coping mechanism there to kind of, help escape from just the pressures and the stresses of COVID. And then about halfway through COVID, I ended up deciding after watching porn one day that it was just enough for me. And it kind of came down to a decision. A lot of it was just I was tired of feeling the shame that I was feeling. There's a phrase in the recovery spaces, which is, I move at the speed of pain. And I'd finally hit enough pain in a rock bottom where I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm out. And ever since that day, that was, for me, it was May 21st, 2021. And it has now been, at the time of this recording, 3.5, almost 4 years of not watching pornography. And for me, it's given me a lot of different insights. One being that, there's kind of this idea that once you quit watching pornography, that everything's going to fall in together and that you're going to have waves of testosterone and there's going to be profound amount of clarity. I will say that, there are moments of that for me. I don't want to discourage you from quitting because I think watching pornography has caused me to go into some deep depressions and anxiety spirals. And I don't think it's healthy for the human brain. But at the same time, also acknowledging that sobriety isn't, all dandelion, isn't like roses and rainbows either, that it is still difficult. I still have to face my suffering, but instead of going to a coping mechanism, that's unhealthy, I go to other things. I turn to breath work. I go take a sauna. I go for a jog. I speak with my partner. I have emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy with my partner, as opposed to, maybe isolating. And so just wanting to acknowledge that I do feel a deeper sense of clarity. It isn't like all of a sudden, I'm like rock solid and going with 100% energy all the time. I'm a human being, and, I go through waves and ups and downs as any cycle does. However, I don't feel the shame of watching pornography anymore. I don't feel like I'm hiding anything, which is pretty huge. I don't feel like I'm holding on to the secret of objectifying and watching women and then going out into the real world and trying to pretend to be a nice guy. And Dr. Robert Glover, he wrote a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And in that book, he says that the nicer the guy, the darker the pornography. So the nicer we present ourselves to the world, the darker we are kind of in the secrets. And so for me, this has been a process of kind of trying to bring that shadow self or that darker side into the forefront and ask that part what it really needs to hear from me. And so I just shared this story with you as hopefully a beacon for hope and a beacon for light. I'm going to share some more statistics here because I think that they're very interesting and kind of speak to sort of what's going on in our culture right now. And just imagine that, this is occurring at a pretty deep level in our psyche and in our society at the moment. 70% of men aged 18 to 34 visit adult websites at least once a month. So that means that, over 2/3 of all men are watching pornography, and some are only doing it maybe once or twice a month. Some are doing it every day. Some are doing it for hours a day. So there's definitely a variety when it comes to addiction. However, this is programming the brain. What we put into our psyche programs us. And so when we're consistently watching pornography like that, even once or twice a month, it can have a profound impact on the brain. I don't want to shame or bring any sort of negative energy towards this process because, somebody who's watching pornography does not need any more shame. This is more so just a process of education to help us to understand what's going on here. But if you think about the history of the internet's only been around since the 1980s. Before that, pornography, you could, view magazines or maybe go to a peep show every once in a while. But pornography usage really kicked up since the 90s. And if you think about how long ago that was, at the time of this recording, that was only like 40 years ago. So the human brain has only had about 40 years to develop to the amount of pornography that is being consumed today and the ease of access. Beforehand, even going out to get a magazine, there was a little bit of dopamine, and you had to get up and actually go out of the house. There wasn't that same level of dopamine that you have access to today, where pretty much every fantasy is available to somebody online. I think that Jordan Peterson has a quote as well that is very impactful, which is that, today men can see more beautiful naked women in one afternoon than a man in the 80s could see in his entire lifetime. And I think that speaks to the profound effect that pornography has, that our brain has not caught up to our brain has not evolved to the technology that pornography has to offer. There's a lot of stimulus in our society today, and especially even with like TikTok and Instagram, there's a lot of stimulus that comes in, but with pornography, that dopamine level is already up there. I think that for our future generations too, and even currently for our generations, there's just so much instant access to pornography, even just like, softcore sort of stuff, even on like TikTok or Instagram Reels, or just watching models. For me, one of the first steps to really kind of come out of my pornography addiction was to block everything from my social media. Currently today, I don't use Instagram. I would say that at the time though, when I was using Instagram, unfollowing all of like the attractive people who were triggering for me, even previous friends from high school who I don't talk to anymore, it was just like blocking anything that may have a potential trigger for me, because I know for me, Instagram, just seeing an image immediately triggered something inside of me. And so I learned to block that, and anytime there was something even remotely triggering, I learned to just say I'm not interested in this, like using the features on Instagram or even like YouTube shorts. Like I just constantly say I'm not interested, or if I see something like a YouTube ad that has like something that kind of triggers me, I block that ad from my future site. I try to keep anything I can away from me that has the potential to trigger me, because I'm an addict, and if given enough runway, my addict will eventually get to a point where there's not an ability to turn back. But I do have that choice. I do have that space in the moment to choose not to do that. And I will say that today I do feel a deeper sense of just being grounded in who I am. And I also want to share a couple of other statistics here, because I think it's important as well. So men who view pornography frequently are 2.6 times more likely to report feelings of shame or worthlessness. 68% of divorces involve one partner meeting someone online or engaging in excessive pornography use. That's incredible to know that over 2/3 of divorces are caused because of meeting somebody online, which most likely had something to do with some sort of pornography use that got out of hand, and then seek excitement through sexual addiction in some way with another. And then regular pornography use correlates with reduced satisfaction in romantic relationships, including decreased sexual satisfaction and emotional connection. There are a lot of men who struggle with erectile dysfunction, a huge part of that being their brain is conditioned to be receiving more dopamine than in what is given in a natural human relationship, and also the fact that there's now some fear inside of the body. There's a risk of rejection that isn't typically there when we watch pornography. When we watch porn, we're getting a reward without any risk. And that plays out to all different forms of life. It's that short-term gratification that comes with, purchasing something as opposed to investing it long-term. That comes with choosing to watch pornography instead of invest into a long-term relationship. Comes in, choosing to stay home and watch Netflix instead of going and working out. So it's all these compounding choices of choosing short-term pleasure over long-term gains. And the reversal of the script is now choosing your future self, choosing those long-term gains, choosing to be uncomfortable in the moment so that your future self can reap some of the rewards. And that's really what this process is moving forward. Another important statistic, so men who quit pornography report higher levels of self-control, improved focus, and more fulfilling relationships. And so there are 3 major benefits to quitting pornography: improved mental clarity and focus. Like I mentioned, it can reduce brain fog and help with just like better decision making, which is pretty incredible. It will have increased productivity and motivation in daily life. Like I mentioned, it's not like this huge wave of testosterone and I'm 100% cured and everything is all dandy, fine and dandy from here out. But I'm here making videos. I'm working a full-time job. I'm going to graduate school. I'm in a long-term romantic relationship. None of this would have been possible if I hadn't quit pornography, because I'm choosing these long-term gains and I'm choosing to be uncomfortable in the present moment. I'm choosing to step out of my comfort zone on a daily basis. And it's not like those triggers to watch pornography aren't there. They come on from time to time, but I'm having to choose other ways of being. And one way that has really helped me is actually connecting to a sense of spirituality. I think that working a 12-step program could be very beneficial as a resource for you if you're looking to start working with quitting pornography, as well as finding another support group with men or an accountability group. I think that using some of the ad blockers, which you can download now onto your phone, as well as onto your computer browser to make sure that you're not able to watch anything. You can give your password to a friend if you needed to use something, or like have that so that there's extra steps that are required in order to access sites that might be triggering to you as well. 12-step groups, add, site blockers, and then also working with a professional who knows what they're doing. There's sex certified therapists who can really help out with this. They're professional coaches. Even joining like an online community, like on Reddit, a NoFap community or something that might resonate with you. Doing this with other people, getting out of that isolation is so important, because that's what the pornography is doing, is it's isolating oneself. And I know for me, it was keeping me away from being around other people or putting myself out there in romantic relationships. It was a deep form of isolation. And then also something that a benefit as well is that, an enhanced emotional and relational health. So there's a reduced sense of shame and guilt that comes with no longer watching pornography, which then leads to greater sense of self-compassion and acceptance of oneself, and also a deeper sense of confidence as well. And for me, it's kind of in that process of learning to be self-compassionate with myself, that it's okay to stumble, even learning to come out of pornography, that it doesn't have to be this perfect recovery process. I think that perfectionism is what keeps me in those addictive cycles. Whereas if I can learn to just be okay and accept the present moment and accept my failings and ultimately accept my humanity, that I can find a little bit of peace and stability in my life. Also, quitting pornography leads to deeper relationships, deeper authentic and emotional connections in relationships with romantic partners, as well as with other people in our lives as well. And it also leads to a reclaimed sense of self-control and empowerment. Quitting pornography can help build resilience to take on the daily challenges of life. Instead of always cowering every time something difficult happens or something triggering happens or something doesn't go our way, we learn to stand up tall, to, straighten up our spine, and not in a way that we're not feeling the emotions or feeling what's going on inside of us. We're absolutely here to process and grieve, and it's actually in that process of feeling the emotions that we can alleviate some of that tension that may be wanting to get us to use. But it's more so just learning to accept the whims of life and not to constantly try and cope with life, but to live with life, to actually move into the discomfort. Hugh Jackman has an incredible YouTube video online where he talks about how, in his philosophy, about 75% of life is uncomfortable and only 20% of life is comfortable. And if we're only seeking that 25% of the comfort, we're only seeking 25% of our lives that's actually, that element of comfort. Whereas there's an entire fraction, 75%, if not more, where our life could be lived if we were just able to embrace discomfort. And just like the Buddha said, life is suffering. This is a universal truth. And if we can learn how to embrace it, it's learning how to suffer, the art of suffering, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, that we then get to transmute that suffering into something extremely beautiful. So learning how to embrace that and not to hide from that. And then obviously an improved sense of self-esteem and freedom from unhealthy habits. Something that really helped me as well is taking cold showers. I actually now do ice baths as well. But learning to take cold showers, learning to step into discomfort, learning to open up about my feelings, and then ultimately feeling what's going on inside of my body, no longer running from, because that's running from what's going on inside of me, because that's what pornography addiction was for me. It was a coping mechanism. Anytime I felt scared or lonely or really stressed out, instead of just feeling those feelings and meeting those needs, I would use, and that would essentially be my coping mechanism. Whereas today, what I'll do instead is maybe go for a run, go talk to somebody, go for a run, or, go take a sauna, take a cold shower, do something to get my nervous system up and going again, doing 25 push-ups real quick. And then I work with a therapist. I go to 12-step meetings. I have a men's group that I attend. So I have put myself in a place where I need, and I know I need a lot of support, and I receive a lot of support from these groups. I can't do this alone. I can't heal by myself. I need community, and I need others around me helping to support me in places I can go to be emotionally open with others in safe places. And so with that, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are currently looking for a safe place to talk about some of this stuff, I am currently taking on clients. Feel free to click the link below to schedule a one-on-one call with me completely for free. We can just talk about what working together might look like. If you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, and if you're on Spotify, leaving a 5-star review, it really mean a lot to me. It's completely free to do, and it's a way of service of helping others to find this channel as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.